Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Do you find your mind spinning and churning? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones that you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns, but slowly letting go and drifting into the deep night. A quick message for long-time listeners. Are you finding Sleepy Time Tales helpful to you? Has it materially made your life easier and helped you get a good night's sleep fairly regularly? And do you have the means to provide a little bit of support? If you can, please consider helping me grow the show by supporting it on Patreon. My first priority is to do a bit of an equipment upgrade and help cover costs, because I want to make this appealing to more listeners. I know and appreciate that it's already helped a lot of people, and it always makes me very happy to hear from you all. But I feel like a little bit of an improvement in sound quality, maybe people will stick around longer, and I can help people out a lot more. And even ultimately, long run, long range in the next few years, I know this is going to take time if it ever happens, I really would like to do this full time. I'd like to take the time to do more episodes and put a little bit more, have time to do a little bit more creative stuff with it. So if you have the means and if you found the show helpful, please consider backing me a little bit every month. Even if you only have $1 a month to spare, it will be helpful to me. I mean this, every little bit helps. And even at $1 a month, you still get a real benefit. The Catnap episodes that are normally keep for Radio Public are also provided to all patrons at the $1 level and up. So if you sign up at $1, you get the Catnap. I'll give you a shout out on an episode, and you get listed on the Sleepy Time Tales website as well. If you can go up to $5, you get that. Plus you get special edits of every episode. I do a promo-free episode where this whole section is cut out, so you don't have to listen to me nagging you again. And also story-only edits, so if you really don't like the intros at all, you can skip them completely and just listen to the good stuff. As a bonus for the next little while, I'm going to send actual snail mail postcards to new $5 patrons. Thanks to my backer Win, who's going to be getting one in the mail fairly soon. I'm going to be on the lookout for something cool to send through to you. So once again, Win, thank you for your support. If you would like to provide support but you don't have any money in your budget, and believe me, it's the year 2019, I understand. I'm in a similar position most of the time. You can provide support without actually being out of pocket yourself. The big one is to sign up for an Audible trial. You can get yourself a free audiobook to keep and a 30-day free trial of Audible by going to my Audible link. It's audibletrial.com/sleepytime. You will find it in the show notes as well if you want to have a look. You go there, you sign up using my link. I get a little bit of something and you get a free audiobook to keep as well. So it's a win-win and it doesn't cost you a cent. Also, I mentioned the Catnap episodes, which are played on Radio Public. I'm part of their paid listens program, so if you listen regularly there, that is also very, very helpful and doesn't cost you a cent. All you need to do is use a different app. And unfortunately, you do get advertising, and I don't know what they hit you with, so hopefully it's not too distracting. The music in this episode, and all of my episodes so far, is Un Désert by Kumiko. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive, which I've linked their website and their Patreon in the show notes, as they have some very cool stuff, which they've released under various names. I recommend taking a look and checking them out. And also just a quick appeal, if you are listening to the show and it just pops up randomly as you browsing, hit the subscribe or follow button in whatever service you're using so you can get the new episodes whenever they drop. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales, and what is a sleep podcast? To answer your question, let me start with a common problem. Do you find yourself lying awake at night with your mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to talk you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. I gave my parents sleepless nights basically from day one and for many years after that. And even when I got old enough not to bother them anymore, I always struggled to get a good night's sleep. It was quite late in life when I discovered that droning male voices have a tendency to put me into a deep sleep. I discovered this the hard way when I was listening to podcasts at night in bed, and I would find myself waking up with the outro music, wondering what had happened. Eventually, I started to actually listen to podcasts, specifically to help me sleep. It was only quite a bit later, actually, where I discovered that there are podcasts out there specifically intended for people to fall asleep to. I found one that worked very well for me, but when I shared it with other people who had similar struggles, a lot of them didn't enjoy it. Now, while it worked for me very well, not everybody liked the narrator's voice on the show I was listening to. So I thought, I can do something kind of similar with my own boring, drony voice, and let's see how that goes. And here we are. So far, so good. Now, every episode starts with this long intro. Not everybody likes the intros. I've gotten a little bit of feedback, people who don't enjoy it. But overall, when I've mentioned it a few times in different outlets, I get a lot of feedback from other people who do like it. So at the end of the day, it's here for a reason. And if you don't like the intro, I've got a timestamp in the show description, which if you hit that will jump straight to the story. Now, the main purpose of this intro, well, it's got two purposes. The first one is for new listeners, and there's somebody new there every week, and you're always very welcome. To explain exactly what the purpose of this whole thing is. So if you're new to the show, or maybe even new to the concept of sleep podcast totally, there's a couple of different ways you can engage with the show. The first one is you can listen to me fairly closely as I tell tonight's story, but you listen just closely enough that your mind stops spinning and you don't go out of control. I'm an insomniac myself, and I know that the big enemy of a good night's sleep is just your mind spinning and spinning and spinning. So the idea is that you listen to the story just close enough that your mind doesn't spin out into your stresses and strains of your life, and you listen to the story just long enough that you eventually fall asleep. The other possibility, a different way of engaging with it, is maybe just turning the volume down and letting the droning just go on in the background. It's also a possible way for you to engage. There's probably a different type of insomnia for every type of insomniac. So ultimately, whatever works for you is what I'm here to try and help you to do. Now, all the listeners, for them, this is a chance to sort of start getting themselves ready for the night. Kiss your kids goodnight, turn the lights out, have a drink of water, wrap yourself up in your blankets, make sure your room's warm but not too warm. A slightly colder environment is actually quite good for sleep. Not cold, obviously, but cool enough that wrapping yourself in the blanket's a good idea. And prepare yourselves. Because at the end of the day, what we're here to do is build a space together, somewhere that you can just curl up and go to sleep. Tonight's episode is a little bit of an unusual one. I'm starting to get ready for what I'm sort of thinking, well, it's not going to be a very formal thing. I'm thinking of calling it sort of my season 2. I did a lot of preparation before starting the show, but I've also picked up quite a few things as I've gone along that have, if I improve them, will make things a little bit better for me, make it easier for me, and probably better for you, the listener, going forward as well. So in a few weeks, I'm going to be basically relaunching the show. But I'm not going to have any missed episodes or anything between now and then. There's going to be an episode every week, as well as the weekly Catnap mini-sode. But I'm doing some things that are going to make things a little bit easier for me to prepare for taking the show to the next level. So tonight's episode is, if you've seen the show title, is a compilation of 3 of the earlier Catnap episodes that I've put together to make up a sort of greatest hits. It's a mix of them, ones that have been quite popular, just to give people a sense of what they're missing, if they're interested, if there's something that they might find helpful. Those you can find on the Patreon or on Radio Public, or well, I guess here tonight, but there are, I think, 8 episodes out so far, and there's 3 coming up tonight. Now, the main idea is that these stories just keep your mind engaged, but not so engaged that you just can't get to sleep. Keep your mind, have a light mental grip on the story, just to help keep your mind from spinning, and if all goes well, you'll be asleep before I get to the end of the episode. It's important, though, that you don't feel pressurized. It may not work on the first night. Maybe it will take a few nights for you to get used to listening to it. If you're an insomniac, you don't have the habit of sleeping, and developing new good habits can take some time. What is very important, though, is that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and you're prone to late nights staring at the ceiling, just be patient. This may take a while to work for you. So queue up this episode, or maybe a few, or run through the backlog a bit if this isn't long enough. What I actually generally do with my sleep podcast is I just let them stream all night. I lie down in the dark with my earbuds in and let them go. Lately, I've developed a thing that I actually wake up at 3 a.m. and when the stream is still running, I just pop the earbuds back in because they've usually fallen out and waft back to sleep. Sometimes even I wake up like 30 minutes before my alarm goes, and I still just put the earbuds in and go back to sleep. I don't know what it is, but there's something about that 30 minutes that just makes it the most restful part of my night. I think it's just allowing yourself to relax completely right before the alarm. That's just deeply, deeply satisfying. And so you have the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me. I'm here to help you to relax, to improve your life, to contribute in a small way to a major life improvement. People don't sleep these days, and it makes life very hard. So I'm going to help you in a little way to make your life easier, to make it easier for you to face tomorrow and the day after, well rested and better able to cope. I believe very strongly in the benefits of kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. I need you to be kind to yourself. Now, we've all been there. We just can't get to sleep, and we get frustrated and we get angry with ourselves that we can't sleep. But that doesn't help. Don't get tense if you just can't get yourself over the edge and fall asleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep. The intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract that feeling that we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep, and let my voice wash over you and under you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy. But it is not your enemy. It is a natural process that we have been pulled away from by the stress of life and progress that shines bright blue lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. A Cosmopolite in a Café by O. Henry. At midnight the cafe was crowded. By some chance the little table at which I sat had escaped the eye of incomers, and 2 vacant chairs at it extended their arms with venal hospitality to the influx of patrons. And then a cosmopolite sat in one of them, and I was glad, for I held a theory that since Adam no true citizen of the world had existed. We hear of them and we see foreign labels on the luggage, but we find travellers instead of cosmopolites. I invoke your consideration of the scene: the marble-top tables, the range of leather-upholstered wall seats, the gay company, the ladies dressed in demi-state toilets speaking in an exquisite visible chorus of taste, economy, opulence, or art, the sedulous and largest loving garçons, the music wisely catering to all with its raids upon the composers, the mélange of talk and laughter, and if you will, the Würzburger and the tall glass cones that bend to your lips as a ripe cherry sways on its branch to the beak of a robber jay. I was told by a sculptor from Moat Chunk that the scene was truly Parisian. My cosmopolite was named E. Rushmore Coghlan, and he will be heard from next summer at Coney Island. He is to establish a new attraction there, he informed me, offering kingly diversion. And then his conversation rang along parallels of latitude and longitude. He took the great round world in his hand, so to speak, familiarly, contemptuously, and it seemed no larger than the seed of a maraschino cherry in a table d'hôte grapefruit. He spoke disrespectfully of the equator. He skipped from continent to continent. He derided the zones. He mopped up the high seas with his napkin. With a wave of his hand, he would speak of a certain bazaar in Hyderabad. Whiff, he would have you on skis in Lapland. Zip, now he rode the breakers with the Kanakas at Kalianahiki. Presto, he dragged you through an Arkansas post oak swamp, let you drive for a moment on the Alcala plains of his Idaho ranch, and then whirled you into the society of Viennese archdukes. Anon he would be telling you of a cold he acquired in the Chicago lake breeze, and how old Escamilla cured it in Buenos Aires with a hot infusion of the chuchula weed. You would have addressed a letter to E. Rushmore Coghlan, Esquire, the Earth, Solar System, the Universe, and have mailed it, feeling confident that it would be delivered to him. I was sure that I had found at last the one true cosmopolite since Adam. I listened to his worldwide discourse, fearful lest I should discover in it the local notes of a mere globetrotter. But his opinions never fluttered or drooped. He was as impartial to cities, countries, and continents as the winds or gravitation. And as E. Rushmore Coghlan prattled of this little planet, I thought with glee of the great almost cosmopolite who wrote for the whole world and dedicated himself to Bombay. In a poem he has to say that there is pride and rivalry between the cities of the earth, and that men that breed from them, they traffic up and down, but cling to their city's hem as a child to their mother's gown. And whenever they walk by roaring streets unknown, they remember their native city, most faithful, foolish, fond, making her mere breath name their bond upon their bond. And my glee was roused because I had caught Mr. Kipling napping. Here I had found a man not made from dust, one who had no narrow boasts of birthplace or country, one who, if he bragged at all, would brag of his whole round globe against the Martians and the inhabitants of the moon. Expression on these subjects was precipitated from E. Rushmore Coghlan by the third corner to our table. While Coghlan was describing to me the topography along the Siberian Railway, the orchestra glided into a medley. The concluding air was Dixie, and as the exhilarating notes tumbled forth, they were almost overpowered by a great clapping of hands from almost every table. It is worth a paragraph to say that this remarkable scene can be witnessed every evening in numerous cafes in the city of New York. Tons of brew have been consumed over theories to account for it. Some have conjectured hastily that all southerners in town hie themselves to the cafes at nightfall. This applause of the rebel air in a northern city does puzzle a little, but it is not insolvable. The war with Spain, many years, generous mint and watermelon crops, a few long-shot winners at the New Orleans racetrack, and a brilliant banquets given by the Indiana and Kansas citizens who composed the North Carolina Society, have made the South rather a fad in Manhattan. Your manicure will lisp softly that your left forefinger reminds her much of a gentleman's in Richmond, Virginia. Oh, certainly, but many a lady has to work now. The war, you know. When Dixie was being played, a dark-haired young man sprang from somewhere with a Mosbury gorilla yell and waved frantically with a soft-brimmed hat. Then he strayed through the smoke, dropped into the vacant chair at our table, and pulled out cigarettes. The evening was at the period when reservists thawed. One of us mentioned 3 Würzburgers to the waiter. The dark-haired young man acknowledged his inclusion in the order by a smile and a nod. I hastened to ask him a question because I wanted to try out a theory I had. "Would you mind telling me," I began, "where you are from?" The fist of E. Rushmore Coghlan banged the table and I was jarred into silence. "Excuse me," said he, "but that's a question I never like to hear asked. What does it matter where a man is from? Is it fair to judge a man by his post office address? Why, I've seen Kentuckians who hated whiskey, Virginians who weren't descended from Pocahontas, Indianians who haven't written a novel, Mexicans who didn't wear velvet trousers with silver dollars sewed along the seams, funny Englishmen, spendthrift Yankees, cold-blooded Southerners, narrow-minded Westerners, and New Yorkers who were too busy to stop for an hour on the street to watch a one-armed grocer's clerk do up cranberries in paper bags. Let a man be a man and don't handicap him with the label of any section." "Pardon me," I said, "but my curiosity was not altogether an idle one. I know the South, and when the band plays Dixie, I like to observe. I have formed the belief that the man who applauds that air with special violence and ostensible sectional loyalty is invariably a native of either Secaucus, New Jersey, or the district between Murray Hill Lyceum and the Harlem River. This city. I was about to put my opinion to the test by inquiring of this gentleman when you interrupted with your own larger theory, I must confess." And now the dark-haired young man spoke to me, and it became evident that his mind also moved along its own set of grooves. "I should like to be a periwinkle," he said mysteriously, "on the top of a valley and sing Tooraloo, Luraloo." This was clearly too obscure, so I turned again to Coghlan. "I've been around the world 12 times," said he. "I know an Inuit in Upnavik who sends to Cincinnati for his neckties, and I saw a goat herder in Uruguay who won a prize in a Battle Creek breakfast food puzzle competition. I pay rent on a room in Cairo, Egypt, and another in Yokohama all the year round. I've got slippers waiting for me in a tea house in Shanghai, and I don't have to tell them how to cook my eggs in Rio de Janeiro or Seattle. It's a mighty little old world. What's the use of bragging about being from the north or the south, or the old manor house in the Dale, or Euclid Avenue, Cleveland, or Pikes Peak, or Fairfax County, Virginia, or Hooligan's Flats, or any place? It will be a better world when we quit being fools about some mildewed town or 10 acres of swampland just because we happen to be born there." "You seem to be a genuine cosmopolite," I said admiringly. "But it also seems that you would decry patriotism." "A relic of the Stone Age," declared Coghlan warmly. "We are all brothers. Chinamen, Englishmen, Zulus, Patagonians, and the people in the bend of the Kaw River. Some day all this petty pride in one city or state or section or country will be wiped out, and we'll be citizens of the world as we ought to be." "But while you are wandering in foreign lands," I persisted, "do your thoughts not return to some spot, some dear and nary a spot," interrupted E.R. Coogan flippantly. "The terrestrial, globular, planetary hunk of matter, slightly flattened at the poles and known as the Earth, is my abode. I've met a good many object-bound citizens of this country abroad. I've seen men from Chicago sit in a gondola in Venice on a moonlit night and drag about their drainage canal. I've seen a southerner, on being introduced to the King of England, hand that monarch, without batting his eyes, the information that his great-aunt on his mother's side was related to by marriage to the Perkinses of Charleston. I knew a New Yorker who was kidnapped for ransom by some Afghanistan bandits. His people sent over the money and he came back to Kabul with the agent. Afghanistan? Native said to him through an interpreter. Well, not so slow, do you think? Oh, I don't know, says he, and he begins to tell them about a cab driver at 6th Avenue and Broadway. Those ideas don't suit me. I'm not tied down to anything that isn't 8,000 miles in diameter. Just put me down as E. Rushmore Coghlan, citizen of the terrestrial sphere. My Cosmopolite made a large adieu and left me, for he thought he saw someone through the chatter and smoke whom he knew. So I was left with the would-be periwinkle who was reduced to Wurzburger without further ability to voice his aspirations to perch, melodious, upon the summit of a valley. I sat reflecting upon my evident Cosmopolite and wondering how the poet had managed to miss him. He was my discovery and I believed in him. How was it the men that breed from them that traffic up and down but cling to their city's hem as a child to their mother's gown? Not so E. Rushmore Coghlan, with the whole world for his. My meditations were interrupted by a tremendous noise and conflict in another part of the café. I saw above the heads of the seated patrons E. Rushmore Coghlan and a stranger to me engaged in terrific battle. They fought between the tables like titans, and glasses crashed, and men caught their hats up and were knocked down, and a brunette screamed, and a blonde began to sing teasing. My Cosmopolite was sustaining the pride and reputation of the earth when the waiters closed in on both combatants with their famous flying wedge formation and bore them outside, still resisting. I called McCarthy, one of the French garçons, and asked him of the cause of the conflict. The man with the red tie, that was my Cosmopolite, said he got hot on account of things about the bum sidewalks and water supply of the place he came from by the other guy. Why, said I, bewildered. The man is a citizen of the world, a Cosmopolite. He, originally from Mattawamkeag, Maine, he said, continued McCarthy, and he wouldn't stand for no knocking the place. In the Court of the Dragon by Robert William Chambers, from the collection The King in Yellow. O thou who burn'st in heart for those who burn in hell, whose fires thyself shall feed in turn, how long be crying, mercy on them? God, why, who art thou to teach, and he to learn? In the church of St. Barnaby's, vespers were over. The clergy left the altar, and the little choir boys flocked across the chancel and settled in the stalls. A Swiss in rich uniform marched down the south aisle, sounding his staff at every fourth step on the stone pavement. Behind him came that eloquent preacher and good man, the Monseigneur. My chair was near the chancel rail. I now turned towards the west end of the church. The other people between the altar and the pulpit turned too. There was a little scraping and rustling while the congregation seated itself again. The preacher mounted the pulpit stairs, and the organ voluntarily ceased. I had always found the organ playing in St. Barnaby highly interesting. Learned and scientific it was, too much for my small knowledge, but expressing a vivid if cold intelligence. Moreover, it possessed the French quality of taste. Taste reigned supreme, self-controlled, dignified, and reticent. Today, however, from the first chord I had felt for the worse a sinister change. During Vespers it had been chiefly the chancel organ which had supported the beautiful choir, but now and again, quite wantonly as it seemed, from the west gallery, where the great organ stands, a heavy hand had struck across the church at the serene peace of those clear voices. It was something more than harsh and dissonant, and it betrayed no lack of skill. As it recurred again and again, it set me thinking of what my architect's books say about the custom in early times, to consecrate the choir as soon as it was built, and that the nave, being finished sometimes half a century later, often did not get any blessing at all. I wondered idly if that had been the case at St. Barnabé, and whether something not usually supposed to be at home in a Christian church might have entered undetected and taken possession of the west gallery. I had read of such things happening too, but not in works on architecture. Then I remembered that St. Barnabé was not much more than 100 years old, and smiled at the incongruous association of medieval superstitions with that cheerful little piece of 18th century Rococo. But now Vespers were over, and there should have followed a few quiet chords, fit to accompany meditation while we waited for the sermon. Instead of that, the discord at the lower end of the church broke out with the departure of the clergy, as if now nothing could control it. I belong to those children of an older and simpler generation who do not love to seek for psychological subtleties in art, and I have ever refused to find in music anything more than melody and harmony. But I felt that in the labyrinth of sounds now issuing from that instrument, there was something being hunted. Up and down the pedals chased him while the manuals bled approval. Poor devil, whoever he was, there seemed small hope of escape. My nervous annoyance changed to anger. Who was doing this? How dare he play like that in the midst of divine service? I glanced at the people near me. Not one appeared to be in the least disturbed. The placid brows of the kneeling nuns, still turned towards the altar, lost none of their devout abstraction under the pale shadow of their white headdress. The fashionable lady beside me was looking expectantly at the Monseigneur. For all her face betrayed, the organ might have been singing Ave Maria. But now at last the preacher had made the sign of the cross and commanded silence. I turned to him gladly. Thus far I had not found the rest I had counted on when I entered St. Barnabas that afternoon. I was worn out by 3 nights of physical suffering and mental trouble. The last had been the worst, and it was an exhausted body and a mind benumbed and yet acutely sensitive, which I had brought to my favourite church for healing. For I had been reading The King in Yellow. The sun ariseth. They gather themselves together and lay them down in their dens. The Monseigneur delivered his text in a calm voice, glancing quietly over the congregation. My eyes turned, I knew not why, towards the lower end of the church. The organist was coming from behind his pipes and passing along the gallery on his way out. I saw him disappear by a small door that leads to some stairs which descend directly to the street. He was a slender man, and his face was as white as his coat was black. Good riddance, I thought, with your wicked music. I hope your assistant will play the closing voluntary. With a feeling of relief, with a deep, calm feeling of relief, I turned back to the mild face in the pulpit and settled myself to listen. Here at last was the ease of mind that I longed for. My children, said the preacher, one truth the human soul finds hardest of all to learn, that it has nothing to fear. It can never be made to see that nothing can really harm it. Curious doctrine, I thought, for a Catholic priest. Let us see how he will reconcile that with the Fathers. Nothing can really harm the soul, he went on, in his coolest, clearest tones, because... But I never heard the rest. My eye left his face, I knew not for what reason, and sought the lower end of the church. The same man was coming out from behind the organ and was passing along the gallery the same way. But there had not been time for him to return, and if he had returned, I must have seen him. I felt a faint chill and my heart sank, and yet his coming and coming were no affair of mine. I looked at him. I could not look away from his black figure and his white face. When he was exactly opposite to me, he turned and sent across the church straight into my eyes a look of hate, intense and deadly. I have never seen any other like it. I would to God that I might never see it again. Then he disappeared by the same door through which I had watched him depart less than 60 seconds before. I sat and tried to collect my thoughts. My first sensation was like that of a very young child, badly hurt when it catches his breath before crying out. To suddenly find myself the object of such hatred was exquisitely painful, and this man was an utter stranger. Why would he hate me so? Me, whom he had never seen before. For the moment all other sensation was merged in this one pang. Even fear was subordinate to grief, and for that moment I never doubted. But in the next I began to reason, and a sense of the incongruous came to my aid. As I have said, St. Barnabas is a modern church. It is small and well lighted. One sees all over it almost at a glance. The organ gallery gets a strong white light from a row of long windows in the clerestory, which have not even coloured glass. The pulpit being in the middle of the church, it followed that when I was turned toward it, whatever moved at the west end could not fail to attract my eye. When the organist passed, it was no wonder that I saw him. I had simply miscalculated the interval between his first and his second passing. He had come in that last time by the other side door. As for the look which had so upset me, there had been no such thing, and I was a nervous fool. I looked about. This was a likely place to harbour supernatural horrors. That clear-cut, reasonable face of Monsignor C., his collected manner and easy, graceful gestures, were they not just a little discouraging to the notion of a gruesome mystery? I glanced above his head and almost laughed. That flyaway lady supporting one corner of the pulpit canopy, which looked like a fringed damask tablecloth in a high wind at the first attempt of a basilisk to pose up there in the organ loft, she would point her gold trumpet at him and puff him out of existence. I laughed to myself over this conceit, which at the time I thought very amusing, and sat and chaffed myself and everything else, from the old harpy outside the railing, who had maybe made me pay 10 centimes for my chair before she would let me in. She was more like a basilisk, I told myself, than was my organist with the anemic complexion. From that grim old dame, T.S. alas, Monsignor C. himself. For all devoutness had fled. I had never yet done such a thing in my life, but now I felt a desire to mock. As for the sermon, I could not hear a word of it for the jingle in my ears. Over the skirts of St. Paul has reached, having preached us these 6 Lent lectures, more unctuous than he ever preached, keeping time to the most fantastic and irreverent thoughts. It was no use to sit there any longer. I must get out of doors and shake myself free from this hateful mood. I knew the rudeness I was committing, but still I rose and left the church. A spring sun was shining on the Rue Saint-Honoré as I ran down the church steps. On one corner stood a barrow full of yellow jonquils, pale violets from the Riviera, dark Russian violets, and white Roman hyacinths in a golden cloud of mimosa. The street was full of Sunday pleasure-seekers. I sung my cane and laughed with the rest. Someone overtook and passed me. He never turned, but there was the same deadly malignity in his white profile that there had been in his eyes. I watched him as long as I could see him. His laugh back expressed the same menace. Every step that carried him away from me seemed to bear him on some errand connected with my destruction. I was creeping along, my feet almost refusing to move. There had begun to dawn in me a sense of responsibility for something long forgotten. It began to seem as if I deserved that which he threatened. It reached a long way back, a long, long way back. It had lain dormant all these years, and it was there, though, and presently it would rise and confront me. But I would try to escape, and I stumbled as best I could into the Rue de Rivoli, across the Place de la Concorde and onto the quai. I looked with sick eyes upon the sun shining through the white foam of the fountain, pouring over the backs of dusty bronze river gods, and on the faraway arc, the structure of amethyst mist, on the countless vistas of grey stems and bare branches faintly green. Then I saw him again coming down one of the chestnut alleys of the Cour de Reine. I left the riverside, plunged blindly towards the Champs-Élysées, and turned towards the Arc. The setting sun was sending its rays along the green sward of the Rond Point. In the full glow he sat on a bench, children and young mothers all about him. He was nothing but a Sunday lounger like the others, like myself. I said the words almost aloud, and all the while I gazed at the malignant hatred of his face. But he was not looking at me. I crept past and dragged my leaden feet up the avenue. I knew that every time I met him brought him nearer to the accomplishment of his purpose and my fate, and still I tried to save myself. The last ray of sunset were pouring through the great arc. I passed under it and met him face to face. I had left him far down the Champs-Élysées, and yet here he'd come in with a stream of people who were returning from the Bois de Boulogne. He came so close that he brushed me. His slender frame felt like an iron inside its loose black covering. He showed no signs of haste, nor of fatigue, nor of any human feeling. His whole being expressed one thing: the will and the power to work me evil. In anguish, I watched him where he went down the road, the broad, crowded avenue that was all flashing with wheels and the trappings of horses and the halberds of the Garde Républicaine. He was soon lost to sight then. Then I turned and fled, into the Bois and far out beyond it. I knew not where I went, but after a long while, as it seemed to me, night had fallen. I found myself sitting at the table before a small café. I had wandered back into the Bois. It was hours now since I had seen him. Physical fatigue and mental suffering had left me no power to think or feel. I was so tired. I longed to hide away in my own den. I resolved to go home, but that was a long way off. I live in the Court of the Dragon, a narrow passage that leads from the Rue de Rennes to the Rue du Dragon. It is an impasse, traversable only for foot passengers. Over the entrance on the Rue de Rennes is a balcony supported by an iron dragon. Within the court, tall old houses rise on either side and close the ends that give into two streets. Huge gates swung back during the day into the walls of the deep archways. Closed this court after midnight, and one must enter then by ringing over certain small doors. At certain small doors on the side. The sunken pavement collects unsavory pools. Steep stairways pitch down to doors that open on the court. The ground floors are occupied by shops of second-hand dealers and by iron workers. All day long the place rings with the clink of hammers and the clang of metal bars. Unsavory as it is below, there is cheerfulness and comfort and hard, honest work above. 5 flights up are the ateliers of architects and painters, and the hiding places of middle-aged students like myself who want to live alone. When I first came here to live, I was young and not alone. I had to walk a while before any conveyance appeared, but at last, when I had almost reached the Arc de Triomphe again, an empty cab came along and I took it. From the Arc to the Rue de Rennes is a drive of more than half an hour, especially when one is conveyed by a tired cab horse that has been at the mercy of Sunday fate makers. There had been time before I passed under the dragon's wings to meet my enemy over and over again, but I never saw him once, and now refuge was close at hand. Before the wide gateway a small mob of children were playing. Our concierge and his wife walked among them with their black poodle keeping order. Some couples were waltzing on the sidewalk. I returned their greetings and hurried in. All the inhabitants of the court had trooped out into the street. The place was quite deserted, lighted by a few lanterns hung up high in which the gas burned dimly. My apartment was at the top of a house, halfway down the court, reached by a staircase that descended almost into the street, with only a bit of passageway intervening. I set my foot on the threshold of the open door. The friendly old ruinous stairs rose before me, leading up to rest and shelter. Looking back over my right shoulder, I saw him, 10 paces off. He must have entered the court with me. He was coming straight on, neither slowly nor stiffly, but straight on to me. And now he was looking at me. For the first time since our eyes encountered across the church, they met now again, and I knew that the time had come. Retreating backward, down the court I faced him. I meant to escape by the entrance on the Rue de Dragon, but his eyes told me that I never could escape. It seemed ages while we were going, I retreating, he advancing, down the court in perfect silence. But at last I felt the shadow of the archway, and the next step brought me within it. I had meant to turn here and spring into the street, but the shadow that was not that of an archway, it was that of a vault. The great doors on the Rue de Dragon were closed. I felt this by the blackness which surrounded me, and the same instant I read it in his face. How his face gleamed in the darkness, drawing swiftly nearer. The deep vaults, the huge closed doors, their cold iron clamps were all on his side. The thing which he had threatened had arrived. It gathered and bore down on me from the fathomless shadows. The point from which it would strike was his infernal eyes. Hopeless, I set my back against the barred doors and defied him. There was a scraping of chairs on the stone floor and a rustling as the congregation rose. I could hear the Swiss staff on the south aisle, preceding Monsignor C. to the sacristy. The kneeling nuns, roused from their devout abstraction, made their reverence and went away. The fashionable lady, my neighbour, rose also with graceful reserve. As she departed, her glance just flitted over my face in disapproval. Half dead, or so it seemed to me, yet intensely alive to every trifle, I sat among the leisurely moving crowd, then rose too and went toward the door. I had slept through the sermon. Had I slept through the sermon? I looked up and saw him passing along the gallery to his place. Only his side I saw. The thin bent arm in its black covering looked like one of those devilish, nameless instruments which lie in the disused torture chambers of medieval castles. But I had escaped him. Those eyes had said I should not. Had I escaped him? That which gave him the power over me came back out of oblivion, where I had hoped to keep it. For I knew him now. Death and the awful abode of lost souls, whither my weakness long ago had sent him. They had changed him for every other eye, but not for mine. I had recognized him almost from the first. I had never doubted what he had come to do, and now I knew that while my body sat safe in a cheerful little church, he had been hunting my soul in the court of the dragon. I crept to the door. The organ broke out overhead with a blare. A dazzling light filled the church, blotting the altar from my eyes. The people faded away. The arches, the vaulted roof vanished. I raised my seared eyes to fathomless glare, and I saw the black stars hanging in the heavens, and the wet winds from the lake of Hali chilled my face. And now, far away over leagues of tossing cloud waves, I saw the moon dripping with spray, and beyond, the towers of Carcosa rose behind the moon. Death in the awful abode of lost souls, whither my weakness long ago had sent him, had changed him for every other eye but mine. And now I heard his voice, rising, swelling, thundering through the flaring light, and as I fell, the radiance increasing, poured over me in waves of flame. Then I sank into the depths, and I heard the King in Yellow whispering to my soul, "It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God." The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry, from the collection The 4,000,000, published originally in 1906. $1.87. That was all, and 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did. Which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from this first stage to the second, take a look at the home. A furnished flat at $8 per week. It did not exactly beg a description, but it certainly had that word on the lookout for the mendicancy squad. In the vestibule below was a letterbox into which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity, when its possessor was being paid $30 per week. Now, when the income was shrunk to $20, the letters of Dillingham looked blurred, as though they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home, and reached his flat above which he was called Jim, and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with the powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at the grey cat walking a grey fence in a grey backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months with this result. $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim. Her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him. Something fine and rare and sterling. Something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. There was a pier glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen a pier glass in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing its reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now there were two possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair hang out the window some day to dry, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor, with all his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed, just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. And then she did it up again nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. On her went her old brown jacket. On went her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and with the brilliant sparkles still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sofronie, hair goods of all kinds. One flight up, Della ran and collected herself, panting. Madame, large, too white, chilly, hardly looked the Sofronie. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Take your hat off and let's have a sight at the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practised hand. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by meretricious ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she saw that it must be Jim's. It was like him. Quietness and value. The description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, sometimes he looked at it on the sly on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lighted the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love, which is always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her hair was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, long, carefully and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what should I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.85? At 7 o'clock the coffee was made and the frying pan was on the back of the stove hot and ready to cook the chops. James was never late. Della doubled the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door that he always entered. Then she heard his step on the stair away down on the first flight, and she turned white for just a moment. She had a habit for saying little silent prayers about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, "Please God, make him think I am still pretty." The door opened and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow, he was only 22 and to be burdened with a family. He needed a new overcoat and he was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door, as immovable as a setter at the scent of quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly with that peculiar expression on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went for him. "Jim, darling," she cried, "don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you." "You've cut off your hair?" asked Jim laboriously, as if he had not arrived at that patent fact yet, even after the hardest mental labor. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me just as well anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" Jim looked around the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone," he said, with an air almost of idiocy. "You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold. I tell you, sold and gone too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs on my head were numbered." She went on with sudden serious sweetness. "But nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded his Della. For 10 seconds let us regard with discreet scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week or $1 million a year, what is the difference? A mathematician or a wit would have given you the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. This dark assertion will be illuminated later on. Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table. "Don't make any mistake, Dell," he said, "about me. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you unwrap that present, you may see why you had me going a while at first." White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper. And then an ecstatic stream of joy, and then, alas, a quick feminine change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the employment of all the comforting powers of the lord of the flat. For there lay the combs. The set of combs, side and back, that Della had worshipped long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoiseshell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers, but the tresses that should have adorned the covetous adornments were gone. But she hugged them to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and smile and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della leapt up like a singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly upon her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch, I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," said he, Let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them a while. They're too nice to use just at present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs, and now suppose you put the chops on. The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat, who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasure of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all those who receive gifts, these two were the wisest. Of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are the wisest. Everywhere they are wisest. They are the Magi. And that was The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry from the collection The 4 Million. Just a little note, if you decide to follow the links in the show notes and look up the collection yourself, I am going to give a little bit of a warning that there's some sort of astonishingly racist language in some of the short stories. I have to pick them quite carefully which ones I play out, so just be aware that if you have a look, the works are quite wonderfully written, but definitely products of their time. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Sleepy Time Tales podcast, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in the new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert by Kumiku. Check out more of their work on their website and their Patreon, which you will find linked in the show notes. Good night and sweet dreams.